What's up, everybody? We're here live today. It's a Wednesday. It's been this week has been back to back lives almost every single day. Just yesterday we had the live with King Siddharth of Head Out. That was a very in depth dive. Today we're gonna do something a little different. This is a new format for this channel as well as for 10K designers. We're going to be reviewing some projects by you guys. So these were projects that were shared in the Telegram group. And what we're going to do is we're going to open them up. I'm going to be going through them and we'll be trying to figure out what are some ways that it can be improved. So this is going to be like a live feedback session where I think the biggest learning for you guys would be how would I approach a certain design and getting feedback so you can start iterating. Because what happens often is you do the first version of the design, you have some ideas of where it can be improved, but sometimes you can get stuck and you really need a fresh pair of eyes to check that out and figure out what is the scope of improvement. So we're going to be doing that in this live session. We have 3 case studies to review and we're going to get started in 20 seconds. Okay, so let's get started. The first one that we are going to talk about is this ICICI Direct app case study by Shritala Sonar. Now, this is, so overall, let me just say we're going to cover 3 case studies. This is the first one. The second one is going to be an Uber Eats design. This is by Rahul. And we have a website for BPC. This one is by Diksha. So we're going to cover all of these today, starting with the ICICI Direct app case study. So for those of you who are working on portfolios, doing a case study is actually one of the best ways to showcase your projects and talk about your process. Now, what I mean by that is most designers, when you look out, you have Dribble, you have Behance, and you have Instagram as well now. Usually there are small snippets that they usually share, which is the final output. But when you're applying for internships, freelance projects, or even full-time jobs, the recruiter, the person on the other side, wants to know how good you are, not just in terms of what your final output was, but how did you get here? Because design is never in a silo, it's never a closed thing. With design, there's usually a real business attached to it. There's usually users who are already using the app. There might be stakeholders that you have to work with. These stakeholders could be the clients that you're working with. Let's say it's a freelance project. It could be the other business units in the company. It could be a lot of different people. So a design process, what it should represent is how you took all the inputs available to you, whether it was, feedback on the Play Store from users, whether it was what the people in the company think about the project, how their launch went last time and how it's performing now. It could be about the data. The design process represents all these inputs that you took, the way you processed them, the way you understood the problems, and the way you reached at this final solution. Now, this final solution is what you'll see on Instagram and Dribble, but usually for every single project, there's a huge part to it that is often invisible, and case studies are the best way to talk about it. So the first one, we're going to get into it right now. So for this, let me quickly go over the structure for you to understand what a case study can include. Now, overall, I really like the structure. It tells a story from the beginning to the end. The sections that you see here, you have how did this project start, personal goal with this project, business side, user reviews. I'm assuming these are from like the Play Store or the App Store. There are some interviews, identifying problems. There is user personas, which is who are the people actually using this. You have defining the problem, which is before you start designing and solving things, what is the problem that you're solving? So based on the inputs, how do you define this? You have ideation, which is now that you have a rough idea of what things are, getting into what the different ways you can approach the problem. You have some sketches here. You have the final design, high fidelity design and the prototype. And then you have the final visual design with a video of the prototype. And what I really like towards the end is a sentence that says what you could have done better, which is really good because it talks about constraints. It talks about real constraints because no project is perfect. You have limited time, you have limited resources, you're working with other people. They might not care about the same things that you're trying to fix with the design. So that's a good section. And overall, this is the structure. Now, let me quickly start with some visual feedback firstly, right? For people in the chat, Syed, you can't send the project right here for the review. These were previously sent on the Telegram group. But what you can do is join the Telegram group. You have the link right here. And the next time we do this video, I can pick up your project. So the first thing I would say is this portfolio site. It's a really good site. But I think it's made in WordPress, which means usually there's certain limitations on how much editing you can do, how much you can change the design of the website without having to get into code. So that way, that is a limitation that you have, which is you have limited, I'm assuming you have limited control over what the overall design of the site is. That's totally okay though. Some overall top level feedback that I would give is, now when I'm reading, right, my eyes always go from left. So English, we read left to right. So you have this sentence, and the way I would start reading is I would start scanning and I would go, this project idea came to me when one of my friends who's a stockbroker works at, and I would finish reading this sentence. So it goes left to right, and then I go back to left, and then I start reading this, right? Typically, it's a good idea, it's a good practice to limit the width of your container such that when I go all the way from left to right, I don't have to travel, my eyes don't have to travel all the way back. So let me show you what that might look like. So I'm just going to get in here. Right now, the width of your container seems to be 1170. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just change this to maybe 800 pixels. Now in the comments, I quickly want you guys to comment on this. Between what we just saw and now with 800 pixels, what do you think seems more readable between this and the previous one? Now, in my opinion, this has made it much more easier to read because the sentences have become shorter, right? I don't have to go left to right, and then my eyes would have to travel back and find the second sentence. So a quick rule of thumb to remember, which is how wide should it be, is whenever you have text, it's a good idea to limit this to about 12 words, right? So let's say over here, this is probably more than 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So roughly this is 12. I'm not counting and, in, to. That's a quick tip. So whenever you're designing websites, especially content where I have to read a lot, try to make the column smaller. It's a small thing that can make a big difference. So now that we've done this, let me actually now start going through this. I've actually already read this, so I'm just quickly going to recap what some of my thoughts were. This sets the background. This is a good thing to include. Timeline here is 1 week. This is also a good thing to include because this gives people an idea, the person reading it gives them an idea of what the constraints were. So let's say a 1 month project will probably be way more detailed than a 1 week project. You want to let them know so that their expectations are correct. You have these techniques. This is a good way to include overview. One thing that I would suggest, maybe you can make this a little bit visual. So let's say you have maybe 3 columns and an icon, but personally I'm okay with this as well. You have a goal here, which is good because it sets the expectation of what I should expect while I'm reading this. Business side, this is a good thing to include. Reason being that I might not actually know what the ICICI Direct app is. I've actually never used it. So if you quickly jump to the technical details and start saying the problem is the direct mutual funds buying flow doesn't have this, I probably will have no idea what you're talking about. So it's good to set the context to help me understand the business side before you actually get into the details. So the way Shritala has done that is the main features of the app, and then there are user reviews. Now, this is probably taken from the App Store or the Play Store, and usually in your research process, this is a good way to figure out low-hanging fruit. Now, low-hanging fruit is a term we use in product, which is things that can quickly be fixed with minimal time effort. So things like this, once you actually start collecting reviews, you can quickly identify what patterns stand out. So you can say a lot of people are talking about this. This is something we should prioritize. So your product team actually gets that feedback to figure out what to fix. There's one section here on user interviews. So what's been done is 3 interviews with 3 ICICI Direct app users. And then based on this, personas have been identified later. Some problems that are being designed for. So this, for example, is figuring out from the overall reviews, which is a lot of data. So there might be hundreds and thousands of reviews. What this section does is it tells you from that, these are the problems that stood out, right? So now what you're doing is from this overall sea of reviews, you're pulling out insights and you're saying, these are the things that, can be fixed. And of course, you might not be able to fix all the things, and that's okay, but you should talk about that in your case study. One thing that I would improve in this section though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a screenshot of this and move this over to Figma. Unfortunately, this project was designed in Adobe XD, so I will not be able to give detailed feedback on your screens. So hopefully next project onwards, you design it in Figma. You know that on this channel, we're Figma gang. All right. We're all going to use Figma. Not just because XD sucks, but because Figma lets us collaborate in a lot of interesting ways. So what I'm going to do is, this is what it currently looks like. This is the change that I would make, which is you're trying to show me individual screens, right? But right now these screens are really small. Like for me to read what this text is, I would have to do this and scroll in, which makes it harder for me to read. One thing that I might have improved with this is bringing some standardization. So for example, this screen and this screen are roughly the same width, but here you have these black borders. Here you've only taken a section of the screen, right? Here you have a section, but this width is more, this is less. So one way I would just standardize everything is I would just create, so the column width that we've set is 800. So I would create an image that is actually 800 in width. Right now this screenshot is probably in 2x or 3x. So not exactly. But I would do this, and I would just set something really standard. So like, let's say I do this, I pick up some ICICI color, hue, saturation, brightness. We talked about this in one of the videos. I would bring down the saturation. So I would bring this down to 10, and brightness, I would bump it up, something like this. And now what I would do is I would put the screen right here. So, and I wouldn't worry too much about adding a mock-up to this and all that. Like, we're not presenting right now, we're just talking about it. So if I do this, what I'm creating is I'm creating consistency throughout the site. Now, every time I see an image, it looks the same, it has the same width. My eyes immediately know where to go, like to the center of it. So every single section, I would actually change it up like this. And add one screen here, one screen here. And for things like this, where you have to show maybe two, here you might have to highlight something. What you can do is you can just maintain the same format and make this two like this. Right, so now you're bringing in somewhat of a design language, which is you're saying that all images on my site are sort of branded in this way with the same consistent style. So that is something that I would do here. You've gone through a few screens. That's good. One thing I would also suggest is maybe have a look at what your typography styles are. So this, for example, is your H1, which is heading 1, which is probably the biggest heading. This is your H2. Now your H3, which is the next smallest heading, right now seems to be this, or maybe it's this. So I would set some hierarchy by figuring out what my typography style is. That way, headings will immediately, jump out from the page. So that way, when I'm reading, let's say I'm just skimming, right? As a recruiter or as the head of design, I might not have time to read every single thing. I can quickly just look at what your headings are and skim the whole page. So I would probably bump up the headings for this. One comment that I shared in the Telegram group, I'll also talk about it here, is when you're writing case studies. Now, writing is a big skill as well. As a designer, you absolutely need to know how to write. Not just because it's good storytelling, but also the better you write, the better you can think. And the better you can think, the better you can design, right? So writing is really important, not just for copy, but also for storytelling. The way you get better at writing is just by writing more. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of stylistic feedback on your writing. A lot of places you've used words like, let's say, worse, right? Like, experience of the app is the worst compared to many competitor apps. Now that is subjective. It might be worst according to you, but the person who designed this, the team who designed this, probably considers this better than some other ones which are even worse. So I would avoid using terms like that. Worst has been used in a few places. This is a user review, that's okay. You said UI is worst here, 2 places here. So I would try avoiding that. Another stylistic thing I thought that you included twice here was whenever a new user wants to log in, trust me, every new individual gets confused with the login button. Now, when I'm telling a story verbally, this is okay. Like I'll say, guys, trust me, Figma is the best. Everything else sucks, especially XD. Everybody else is okay, but XD sucks, Figma is the best. Now that's okay. That's like informal speech. But here, when you want to say every individual, maybe some don't, right? So this is very subjective. A better way I would rephrase this is, out of the users I talked to, most users, or let's say 80% of users, or you can say something like that, got confused trying to figure out where the login button was. So that way we'll have to give any trust to you. We'll just say, yeah, he's talking about what users face. It's not a personal opinion. It's not about what you personally feel about the app. It's objective truth. Out of the 20 people you interviewed, 18 might have said it's bad. So you're just saying that. You're stating facts. So that would be a small stylistic advice for text, for the copy. Another small thing that I would mention is this. I only say it once here. Whenever you talk about users, try to use gender neutral terms. So whenever the user needs to check this, should be available to him, you should say available to them, or you can say available to him/her. And another tip that probably doesn't apply for this case study is that whenever you have users, it's better to not call them users. It's better to find a specific term. So for example, at Unacademy, we technically have two types of users. We have learners and then we have educators. And then in learners, we have learners who have a plus subscription and learners who don't. So that way, instead of saying the user is doing this, we say learners are doing this or educators are doing this. Now for us, learners and educators are also the two broad top level personas. So that is a small tip for you guys. Try to see if you can apply this to a future project. Here, I don't think you could have done that. You can say maybe traders, but not everybody is a trader. So users is okay. It's okay here. Let me get through some of this. Problems I'm designing for. We talked about how the layout of this could be improved. I'm going to now get into personas. Now, I think the two personas you have here, let me just quickly see what's the difference. So the first one's a student, second one's a stock trader, 22, 32. What they think about the app, bad UI, they have less knowledge of it because it's a student. A stock trader, the app for them, it has less information because they're very experienced and maybe it's hard to use for them. This bio, you have it here. You have their goals, which is what they're trying to do. So for example, a student is probably trying to do different things with this app. They're trying to learn what the stock market is. But the stock trader, they already know how to use it and they want to do something which is super advanced or something that they do in their everyday life. Now, the first persona, for example, might only use it very limitedly because they're a student. This is just one of the things they do. Versus for the second person, this is their full-time job. So the reason personas can be useful is different types of users have different goals. Now, of course, technically every user is unique. They have their own set of things they're trying to do, experience with things. But it's good to have broad personas where you're saying that the app is for these types of people. So that's a small tip about what personas are. So the next section here, empathy mapping. For each persona, I guess you've gone into what they say, what they think, what they do, what they feel. Now this is a framework that, now before I get into this, actually I want to say something very important, which is, guys, give me 1 minute. I think my Swiggy order is at the door. Let's just take a short break and we're going to continue from this. 1 minute. Okay, let's continue. So one thing I want to say that's really important is you see all of these things, right? You see empathy mapping, you see personas, you see different methods that have been used. For example, here's this thing called Crazy Eights, right? A storyboard template. You have user flows here. You have, different things. One thing I want to say is that something like this is a toolbox, right? Mayank's question in the chat, which is, a persona is really necessary. What I want you to understand is all of these different techniques, imagine it like a toolbox, which is you have a hammer in this, you have a drill, you have screwdrivers with different screw tips, you have pliers, you have all of this stuff. Now, every single hardware project that you do, you're not going to try to force yourself to use every single tool. You're going to see, okay, for the problem at hand, I think this tool would be useful, which is why I'm going to use this. So personas, for example, for let's say something like booklets.io, right? I'm going to be talking about booklets.io's design process in some of the videos in the future. I didn't actually make personas for this because to me, it's a little obvious. It's bite-sized learning for designers, for creatives. You're probably interested in UI design, UX design, branding, marketing. You're either a beginner or you're advanced. If you're a beginner, you'll probably go for these categories. If you're a little more advanced, you'll probably go for those categories, right? To me, I didn't really see a need to use personas. It would be like, let's say there's a nail, and instead of using a hammer, I'm trying to use the drill, or I'm trying to use the pliers and I'm just hitting it. It'll technically work, but it's not needed. So understand what these tools are, what they're available, the tools available to you, understand how to use them, but beyond that, understand what to use when. Another tip I would give is, you have used probably a tool called UserBit to generate these personas, but I would say try using some Indian photos. This is a really small thing, but showing that you thought of the small details in your app, right? Like, let's say the name for this. Let's pick a desi name, man. Let's do that. That would actually be really useful. Let's pick desi names. Let's pick desi photographs. Here you've defined point of view of both of these personas. One thing I might suggest is this definition section, this empathy mapping and the personas sort of seem related, so probably put them under the same subheading. And I think you've done the empathy mapping for one of the personas but not the others. Maybe that's intentional, but I might think about doing both. And I would probably put the empathy map for each persona next to the persona so I can compare and see what, for example, this dude is saying he gets confused while buying equity. Why does he get confused, right? So I might go here and I might see some details and say, okay, he said it was hard to use, right? So that way you're designing this in a way that you're designing this case study in a way that makes it easy to consume. So so this section here called ideation. So what he's done is, there's a storyboard template. Now this is a format that you can get from the internet. It's basically just 6 boxes or 8 boxes. You can even use post-its for this, where each post-it is one thing, where you try to tell a story, which is this person, what do they do? So this person opens the app, they want to check the Sensex and Nifty, then they want to check this. Now you've invested easily, then they want to see their dashboard, then they want to see how it's performing, then something else, right? This is especially useful for projects which are sort of bigger, where let's say it goes from, there's a lot of different things you can do into the app. It might be useful for that. But then for smaller projects, or not for every project will this actually be useful. So don't do empathy mapping. Don't try to stuff it in just for the sake of it. Think about if it's needed. If you think it might be helpful, do it. And also, don't do this just for your case study and don't do it in real life. Like, don't do that, right? Don't fake things. If you've used it in the actual project, then include it in your case study. Otherwise, don't include it. And if you're feeling conscious about it, just say, we didn't do this and this because we didn't think it was necessary. Which is one of the confusion points, actually. A lot of people have this question of what to include in case studies, right? You can include anything, right? Just be honest and tell a story of your process and lead story-wise to the final output. There's a user flow here. This is a diagram. Some sketches here. There's one feedback somebody mentioned in the Telegram group. I don't remember who it was. They said the sketches, you could probably explain why you rejected them. That's a good idea. I would probably do that as well. You have these, which are the wireframes. I would say maybe instead of calling it sketches, you can call them wireframes, or you can say low fidelity wireframes. Then you have this, which is XD. I don't want to spend too much time looking at XD because it hurts my eyes. Just kidding. But this is your design. Another thing I would say here is you probably didn't need to include this XD frame. Now, I don't know what's happening in the screen, right? Without zooming in. So you're trying to hide things. You're trying to not show me things clearly. That's not a good thing. So I'll probably remove all this and try to figure out a way to show this in a better way. Now, you have how many screens here? 3, 6, 8, like 16 or 17 screens. And your final visual design, for example, shows me just 6. Again, you've put this in a mock-up where you might be trying to do something which is like dribble style, but then what you're doing is you're hiding from me. You're hiding all of this from me. And if you are, I might feel that you're not confident enough in showing what your solution was. And if you're not, that's okay. Just keep practicing. But I would say try to avoid doing something like this in your case study. There's one interaction here which happens. This, I'm assuming, came with the WordPress theme you're using, but I would say you should probably disable this. And for this presentation as well, I would say try using a format similar to this, because now that you've established this format in the beginning of your case study, carrying over that same style would be a good thing to do. It adds consistency to the case study. Yeah, the prototype here, I'm just quickly going to go through this. This could probably be presented better. I'm actually not going to go through this right now. I just want to get to the other ones. But overall, that's this project. Thanks for sending it in. The feedback that I've added, try to make a note of it. Try to make just bullet points of to-do lists, and you can work on them one by one. All right, is everybody with me? Can we jump into the second portfolio now? Sorry, not the second portfolio, the second project now. Can we do that in the comments right now? The next project we have here is a design for Uber Eats. This is, of course, a hypothetical project, just like the previous one. This is sent in by Rahul on the Telegram group. We're going to get into this right now. So the first thing I would suggest, so here I asked Rahul to actually send me the edit access to his Figma file so that I can actually go into this and change things and show you what can be improved. So I have this here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to duplicate this, or actually I'll just keep it like this. It's chill. One thing I would say is use pages really well, which is this thing on the left here. This helps you organize your file better. Now, maybe you have very limited screen, so you haven't used it. That's okay. But I would say in the future, try to use pages to put different sections of the app. So I can just go and see that as an index. Let's get into this now. Overall, the sections, what I'll do is I'll duplicate this page and then I'll make suggestions to that. What I'll also do is I'll share view access with you. I think the link was already shared in the Telegram group, but I'll just do that once more. So all of you can actually jump in. We can chill out in the Figma file like we usually do. Okay, so what I've done is I've duplicated this page. Now I'm going to make suggestions over here. Initially, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly just clean up everything, which is think of your Figma files as an open book, right? You're giving a book to somebody. You don't expect them to just jump to the center and start reading. They'll probably start on the first page. They'll see the index. Then they'll go to the first section. Or if they wanted to jump to a different, they'll use the index, page number, and go forward. So this, think of it as an open book, which means you have to make it very readable. What I would have done is I would take these screenshots and put them right on top. Ideally, I would put them in a separate page itself. But for now, I'll just move it here. These screenshots are actually from Uber Eats. And in just a minute or just a few minutes, I'm going to also tell you guys about why redesign apps like Uber Eats, like what's the point. I'll talk about that in just a bit. So the first flow of the app would probably be food selection or maybe the home pages. So I'll move this here now. Then it would be food selection. So move this. After food selection would be feedback UX. Oh no, after food delivery would be cart. Food selection would be cart, sorry. So I'm going to select this, move it here. I'll put cart right next to it actually. And then after all of this is done, the feedback UX. So I'm going to put this right here. Oh, I missed one thing, which is resources. I'll probably put that right on the top here with this main stuff. Did I miss something? Anything else on this file? Okay. So now you have this. These are the rough sections. I'm going to start. Now, right now, I'm going to talk about a simple concept, which is what's the point of redesigns, right? This is something that's really important to me because this is actually how I got started designing, and this is the best way that I've come up with to actually get people comfortable with Figma. The question is, what is the purpose of redesigning apps? Now let me talk about this for a bit. Now you might be thinking, right, this is a project which is a design of Uber Eats, right? Uber Eats is an app that exists, and obviously this wasn't done by the official Uber Eats team. And you might be thinking one of two things, or both things. Firstly, why redesign something that's already out there, right? Which is this Uber Eats app, it's already out there. Actually, hold on. Firstly, why redesign? And secondly, if I am redesigning, why should I redesign it exactly how it is? Like, shouldn't I add some of my own creativity to it, make it slightly different, show my unique style, right? So you might be thinking that. Now, the reason for that is, I'm going to give you a very simple example, which is going to explain this very clearly for everybody, which is, let's say you were a painter. You wanted to learn how to paint really well. Now, there are some techniques you do. Let's say for real, like tomorrow onwards, you wanted to start learning how to paint better, right? You would buy a canvas, you would buy some tools, and you're like, let's get started. Now, I could have told you then that, hey, why don't you take this one painting, let's say the Mona Lisa, and why don't you try recreating this? Now, you as a beginner right now in this situation, would you try to redesign the Mona Lisa? You would not, right? Why would you not? Because the way it is, it's at a certain level, and you right now might not appreciate why it is like that, right? Because you might not be able to see all the nuances and the depth in that painting. Somebody who's been painting for 30 years is going to look at it very different from how you as a beginner will look at it. So you wouldn't try to redesign it. You wouldn't try to say, hey, let me add my creativity. What you should do is you should be like, okay, let me try to recreate it so I can understand the process behind it. How you would do that is, let's say you start designing, you make your first copy of it, and now you compare both of them. You're going to be like, this looks nothing like the original, right? And then you're going to be like, why doesn't it look like the original? Like, what's missing? And then piece by piece, you're going to start figuring out, okay, I think this could have been different. This is why the brush strokes of my painting look different from the other painting. And if you keep recreating, let's say you make it the second time, third time, fifth time, 100th time, right? I'm not saying do that, but let's say you did. You would probably have something that looks very close to the Mona Lisa, and you would now understand everything that went behind it. You would understand what kind of paints were used. You would understand while painting how much pressure was applied with the brush. What are the different types of brushes that were used? You would understand what kind of canvas, what effect does the canvas have on the painting? You would understand what is the composition like. How do you separate the foreground and the background of the painting? There's so many things you would figure out. The purpose of redesigning apps is exactly that. It's not to show your creativity. It's not to say that this sucks, I can do it better. It's just to understand the techniques. Now, in my opinion, redesigned apps, it's a tricky situation putting them in your portfolio, because let's say you redesign something really, really well, right? Let's say Uber Eats, you show me two screens and they look exactly the same. You've probably learned a lot trying to figure out the exact colors, style guide, spacing and everything. But you put this in your portfolio and people are going to be like, what do you mean you redesigned this? This looks exactly the same. So redesigns are not typically for putting in your portfolio. They're for you to practice. Once you practice and once you get better, you can start doing some things differently. And a case study, ideally, shouldn't just be a redesign saying, this is what it was, this is what I did. It should be exactly like the previous project, which is, these were some of the problems identified and these are the solutions. So, as an example, let's say, I'll give you two examples. One, let's say somebody did a thing where they said, I'm going to redesign WhatsApp. And the second person, what they did was, instead of saying, I'm going to redesign WhatsApp, they said, okay, Telegram has this one feature which lets you customize the look of the app. Not just light mode and dark mode, but you can change the colors of stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to explore, if WhatsApp did this, what would it look like? Or I'm going to do interviews where I figure out what problems do people have with how WhatsApp looks right now and with appearance. Right? That's not saying I'm going to redesign the whole app. It's saying I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to figure it out. And doing that would be really good. Or let's say Telegram, for example, has polls in the chat. So you can send polls. WhatsApp obviously doesn't have that. What you could do is you could actually do a case study where you say polls in WhatsApp case study, where you talk to people and you say, what are some use cases where you might see this is useful? So you might be like, okay, like in a group chat, I want to ask my friends what to order. So I made a poll saying biryani or pizza. And now most people said pizza, so that was good. Right? So you might do all this, you might get these insights and then you redesign it. That's how you should be approaching redesigns for your case study. Hopefully you guys understood that. I also have a video about this. It's called The Best Way to Practice Design. And what it is it's exactly this. It's a two-part video. The first part of the video talks about this technique that I just discussed. And the second part of the video is a 1 hour video where I actually go and try to recreate the TikTok UI. And the reason I actually did that was so you guys understand in depth what level you should recreate. So for example, you need to figure out what the text styles are. You need to figure out what the spacing is. There's probably a system for these spacings as well. You need to find out what the overall color palette is. You need to find out what are the components, like what kind of cards do they use? What kind of dividers do they use? What kind of headers do they use? What kind of icons do they use? Do the icons have a shadow on it so it looks better, right? What's the selected state of buttons? What's the primary button, secondary button, selected button, things like that. So you should try to go as much in depth as possible and one-to-one create a copy of that design. The video, I did it a while back, is these two videos right here. So you can check this out after the stream in your own time. Now getting back to this, these are the screenshots. What I would probably do is I would arrange these screenshots a little differently. I'll probably put this one in the front. I understand why you've done this. This is rating the previous order, but I might do that. Okay. Now one very simple thing I want to talk about here that I think you missed out on is your artboard sizes here are kind of weird. Like it's width 540 and your height is whatever, but that's not a typical size. Like even here, this thing that you've used, if I mirror this on my iPhone 10, which is what you've designed for, this is the iPhone 10 status bar, it's going to look weird. The reason is this is not the correct artboard style, not the correct frame size. So the way you should ideally start your project is, let's say you're designing for iPhone 10, you would do this, and now this is the correct style. What you've probably done is you've done a slightly bigger multiple, but I would say always design at 1x. These sizes you see here, they're all 1x. And now if I was doing this, let me also open up, let's say the iOS style guide, so I can pick up some elements. That would really improve things. So once you create this, I would also probably resize my original screenshots to be the same. One reason why you might have slipped up here is because the screenshots are Android, but you're designing for iPhone 10. You might not have an iPhone, so you weren't able to see whether it looks fine or not. It's totally okay. It's fine. Just something to keep in mind. Your artboard sizes really do matter. The frame sizes, they really do matter. I'm going to go to this UI kit right here. And I'm going to pick up just the status bar to show you what the difference is. Where's the status bar, bro? Okay. So Rahul, by the way, Rahul just mentioned in the chat, he used the same size as that was phone screenshot. That's probably not what you should do. The reason being, every phone has a differently sized screenshot. So that's not the best thing to do. And also a lot of times screenshots will be 2x or 3x. Like they won't actually be the size of the design. And your design, you should always do 1x. So this is what an iPhone screen looks like. Like this is the correct padding for the status bar. So what you've probably done is you got this from a file, but you had to resize it to make it correct. But this is what it would look like. So I would actually consider updating this to the correct frame size. A quick question here, do we have to design for every screen size? No, you do not. At the very top level, you're either designing for iPhone or you're designing for Android. If you're designing for iPhone, pick any one iPhone, right? Pick the iPhone 11 here, or pick the iPhone 8. Pick any one. And for iPhone 10, you might have to do some things differently because it has rounded edges. It's not square edges. You might have to design slightly differently, but you don't need to do that for every screen, only for the relevant ones. And if you're designing for Android, what you can do is you can use the Android size here, which is 360 by 640. And when they're developing it, the developers, they will figure out the responsiveness such that it works on every screen size. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to let me open up what Uber Eats screenshots look like on iOS, because the ones you have here are Android. So for 16:9 and 19:9 ratio, you don't need to worry about it. Just design one and the developers will figure it out. Or you can work with the developers once it's there to make sure everything is fine. You just need to design one artboard size. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this site called Mobbin. If you guys don't already know, this is a pattern site. This lets you see screenshots. It's very similar to UI sources, but it's just screenshots. Now they don't have all apps, obviously. I know they have Uber Eats, which is why I went here. They have basically all these screens in order. So the home screen, I would probably save screenshots of all of this and I would put it in the file. If I do that right now, it'd probably take too much time. So I'm just going to say that and head back to the Figma. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of feedback and then that's going to be it for this particular project, which is when you're trying to redesign, try to do 100% redesign. Like 1-to-1, you should be able to see the difference. One thing that I do see is missing is the font you've used is different. The typeface here is different. Now I understand you might not have been able to get it either because it's a paid font or you couldn't find it. For the purposes of practicing for private projects, it's okay. Okay, I don't know how to say this, but just get the font file, dude. It's okay. Just get the pirated thing. If you end up using it in a commercial project, definitely pay for the license. You don't want to get into issues later. But for a personal project, Like I don't recommend pirating fonts, but if you can't afford it, go for it. And try to make this as real as possible. So your text styles, your paddings, your colors, all of these things. So one thing I would also suggest maybe doing is just in the side over here, figuring out what the text styles are. So before you start, figure out the individual components. So say heading 1. And you might say heading 1 is going to be SF Pro text in size 24 and size 32 with line spacing 120%. Then you might say heading 2 is going to be 24 with 120%. So prepare your text styles like this, so that when you are designing, you can just quickly copy the styles and do it. So for example, this you might say I'm going to do, and I don't mean come up with this. Try to actually see what are the text styles that are being used and try to figure out just by looking at it what typeface it is. Is it bold? Is it regular? What size is it? What is the spacing? What is the letter spacing? Like doing this by eye is how you actually develop your design intuition. So I would say do that for the text and also do that for colors. So for colors, for example, it doesn't have to be a fancy design system. Just make these boxes, use the color picker and say, this is the green that they use. Or this is the light green that they use. Just try to figure out every single color that's been used, so that what you're doing is you're deconstructing and trying to figure out what the style guide or the design system of the app is. I see a purple here. Of course, I think the text is probably black. You of course have white backgrounds. You'll also have like a divider color, which is like what are the different grays they use. They don't just use, different shades of gray. They probably use like 2-3, like 50%, 25%. Figure that out. All right, so that's my feedback. For people who are watching, if you do want to send me redesigned projects, this is something you should keep in mind. Yes, you can also include style guide screenshots in your case study. That would also be a good thing to include. So that's about it for this. My overall advice to summarize would be go even more detailed. This is a great first start, but try pushing it. Try to see how much you can push to get much, much closer, such that when people look at this, they should be like, this looks exactly like the team at Uber designed it, right? That's how good it should be. So that's it for this. Good job. We're going to now jump into the last project for this live stream. Is everybody ready? Are you guys ready for the last project in this live stream? The first two, they've been apps. The last one, it's going to be a website. This website, this is by Diksha. It's a website for Bhopal Physiotherapy Center, which I'm assuming is one of her freelance projects. What I'm quickly going to do is I'm going to see what this website actually looks like in the browser, which is, it might look in a certain way in Figma, but if I actually want to see what it looks like, you need to mirror it. And you can easily do that by just going to figma.com/mirror. So what I'm going to do is select this frame and it will start showing up in my mirror. Right, so with this I can actually see what the website looks like. Now there's a lot of feedback I can give for each individual section, but I'm just going to stick to some basic feedback to start with. Roughly the things that I'll talk about will be text style guide, the colors, hierarchy, and the grid. Yeah, these are the things I'm going to talk about. This is by Diksha. She sent it in the Telegram group. Now, the first suggestion would actually be common. This is the same thing that I mentioned for Rahul's project, which is while starting out, first start with your style guide, which is for this, what is your individual text styles and colors. Quick question here: how do you download from Mobbin? You have to get Mobbin Pro, which is $25 a year, which is actually very cheap if you think about it. It's like less than $2,000. It's a valuable resource. I would say use it. And then you can actually just like click this and download image. If you don't want to do that, you want to do some jugaad, right click, inspect element, save the thing, you can also do that. But your time is valuable. I would say just buy the Pro version. Alright, so my first feedback is start with what your text style is going to be. From this, I can see that this is probably your H1. This thing right here. Why am I not able to select the elements? Okay. I would suggest not locking the layers. Lock the layers, maybe just the background layers. Anyways, this seems to be your H1. So what I'm going to do is right now is I'm going to figure out what the text style for your website is. H1, and I'm assuming you want to do all capitals. So you have this. This is probably your paragraph copy. So what I'm actually doing here is I'm doing Command Alt C, Control Alt C, I think for Windows, which you can just copy the style of this and paste it here. Your heading 1 is probably this. One thing I would suggest is whenever text is of two different styles, try to keep them as separate layers. So like here, for example, you've just combined the two. I would suggest keeping it separate. So that's for text styles. And then for colors as well, you're using a very specific color palette, right? So I would say try putting all of this outside and start figuring out what your style guide is. Like this, for example, is a gradient. So what you might do is you might create a box and just put a gradient style. You have another color, which is this light blue here. You have some shades of purple. You have another light blue. Another great advantage of doing this text styles thing is consistency, which is, let's say you make a section down in your page and instead of using the right color, you just like picked something that was slightly close. Or instead of doing exactly the same text style, you did something which was like, let's say the text is 32, you might pick something that's 36. You don't want to do that because small things like this compounded over your entire file leads to inconsistencies. So making a text style here, making all your style guides in one place is useful because it makes sure you will consistently stick to certain paragraph styles, text styles, color styles, and even spacing, I would say. So another thing you can probably add to this is your spacing system, which is, let's say you want to do all big spacing should be 128. Smaller spacing everywhere throughout the thing, you're going to do 64. Even smaller spacing, you're going to do 32. We talked about this in a previous video about how multiples of 8 is a good idea because it just lets you be on a consistent grid. I'm not going to talk too much about that right now, but these are some things that you should consider including in your style guide. Now, one thing that I would change here is improve the hierarchy, which is when I look at this website, I don't really know what is the most important thing, right? The most important thing on this website is probably Bhopal Physiotherapy Center because that's the heading of this page. But if you see the importance given to it, it's pretty small. So let me actually just talk about the top section and then I'll give you feedback for the rest just verbally. So I'm just quickly going to change this up just from scratch, just to give you an idea of what I would do differently. So I have this, which is the background color. I'm going to use the color from the style guide. Right. I have this nav bar on top, which I'm just going to pick up right now. I'm also going to group these three together. Ideally, the nav bar should not have these many elements, especially this top right logo. But I understand clients can be picky. They're like, we need this, it's necessary. So you have your own constraints. All landing pages should have a clear call to action, right? Which is you want them to do after they're done understanding all this. You want them to do something, which is like book an appointment or send you an inquiry or something like that. Here you have a bunch of call to actions, which is you have contact us, which is these two contact options, and then you have submit your query and book appointment. I would try to figure out by talking to the client what is necessary. You are supposed to be helping them solve design problems. So you should be the one who makes them think about all of these things, which is, help them prioritize what they should be doing. And helping them prioritize means asking the right questions, forcing them to make decisions, and helping them understand what goes behind designing a website. Because you're the expert, they are paying you for it. What I'll do is I'll use the same typeface that you have used. I want to bump up the hierarchy, so I'll make it a little bigger. I'll use the same color you've used, which is the purple. And now my spacing, right? I'm going to just create a very consistent spacing system, which is multiples of 8. Everything has to be a multiple of 8. So top 64, between these guys, ideally you should never have decimals in your design. Things like this, absolutely avoid. Do not have it at all. But for now, what I'll do is I'll pretend like it's not there. Just space these out to 24. So that's perfect. That's a multiple of 8. And I'll also set the grid for this, which is You already have a 12 column, so I'm just going to keep it like this. So now I'm going to say Bhopal Physiotherapy Center right in the top here. I'm going to add a paragraph about what services they offer. The same tip that we talked about for the first project, which is don't have text columns that are too wide. So this, for example, if I look at the number of words, it's probably more than 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So it's exactly 12, but it should not be this big. 1070 is too big of a width. I would actually consider dropping this to maybe 6 columns. And I'll also change the style. Oh God. So I'll make this 6 columns. Or, fuck it, let's make it 8 columns. Totally up to you to figure out what would be a good comfortable reading width. Spacing here, I'll say maybe it should be 16. Ideally, you should try avoiding things like this, this is technically called an orphan in typography, where you have one word on one sentence. Try avoiding that. The way I would probably do that is just change the copy, or if that's not possible, just change the width. This also might be a lot of copy for this page. People are not going to read that much. So try with your client to figure out if this can be reduced. If they're too adamant about it, be like, okay, bro, fine, we'll keep it. But you should try to force them, not force them, but guide them on what the best practices are. After this, now I'll put my CTA. Your CTA, both of these, technically submit your query. So you have 3 CTAs, right? Let's try to solve this problem. So your comment here was you've put appointment and query button because you thought they would instantly find them when you need help. That's great. But think about it this way. Booking an appointment is probably primary, right? In the sense that if they're ready to book already, don't get in their way. In the same way that on Flipkart, for example, the primary button is buy. If you're ready to buy, they're not going to get in the way with saying get details, compare this, do that. So book appointment should probably be primary. Now, submitting your query, technically if they emailed you or called you, they would also be giving you a query, right? So these are actually very related. So you can think about combining these in some way. I would also try to figure out maybe cleaner button styles. So I'm just going to do something very simple for now. I'll set the height to be 48, multiples of 8. Width, I'll say maybe 2 columns. Actually, width will change based on what's inside it. So that doesn't matter. I'll copy your style that you have, the gradient style. And then what I'll do is I'll create a secondary button style, which is this. But what I might do, I'm also going to drop this stroke. It should not be there. What I'll do here is I'm not sure what kind of secondary style it should be, but maybe you can do something like this where so these, for example, look like much cleaner buttons, which is one of them is heavy, visually heavier, so you know that it's the primary thing to do, and the other one is lighter. And now I'll put text here. The text for this obviously should be white. So book appointment. The text style for this, you should define what your text style for buttons is. For now, what I will do is I'll just come up with one. So I'll maybe do caps semi-bold. I think I could go bold also. I'll keep the spacing as 16. Actually, fuck it. I'll make all of them 16. Top, bottom, right. Top, bottom, right, left. People on the stream, you guys forgot to tell me to play music this stream. I just realized, why does it feel so quiet? And it's because there's no lo-fi hip-hop going on. Okay, so I have that. So what I would do is I would combine submit query, email, phone number into just one thing, which is contact us. And this will just send you to a section which has all the contact information together. Or it can open a pop-up modal which shows the options that are available. For this as well, I'm going to set a good amount of padding on each side. And I'll just quickly group these layers. And I think this thing looks too thick. I'm just going to drop this to 2. And maybe I'll reduce this spacing to 16 as well. So white space is something that's really important in design. Ideally, I would actually put the main one on the right side rather than the left. I'm not sure what the reason is. It just seems better to me. There is a reason for this. I think most websites do this. Not able to recall. Yeah. Actually, maybe not most websites, but if all of this was left aligned, for example, let me just quickly show you what that will look like. If all of this was left aligned, I might put the primary button first and the secondary button next. Right, this feels much better. But for center alignment, for some reason, I prefer the primary on the right. So you have this. Now I'll just create that video element as well. I'll probably keep it 6 columns as well. One small tip is you have a lot going on here. Technically, I would try to combine all of this into one. So like I'm not able to figure out what the image is. This rectangle, for example, is on top of this as an overlay. What I would have done is just give it an overlay here so that one image has the fill on top of it. The reason for this is while designing, you should try to be as efficient as possible, which is try to use as few layers as you can. The reason you've done this might be because you've added all of this extra stuff. But personally, I'm gonna not include this and I'm gonna try to keep it simple. Now the width of this, I've kept 6 columns, but I think it can also be 8. That might look fine as well. And then this button, I'm just going to put it here. So far what we've done, what do you guys think about this design? What do you think are the things that are better about it? In my opinion, I think white space helps a lot, which is here, for example, you're trying to be efficient with space. You try to keep everything as close as possible, but white space, giving things space to breathe, puts more attention on things. One quick way of understanding that is one quick example to understand why white space is important, right? Before that, actually, let me just fix the aspect ratio of this. Technically, this can't be a random height and width. You probably already know this, but most videos are in 16:9. So if the width of this is 706, the height needs to be 398. Yeah. So the reason white space is important, right? Think about this. Let's say you're out buying jewelry, right? You're out buying jewelry and you're at a showroom. That's scenario 1. And scenario 2 is you're at a place like, let's say, Sarojini Nagar or one of these open air markets. Now, in a showroom, you would probably have like this one necklace, which is in a glass box, which is on this column, and you would have so much white space around it, which is, there would be lights shining on top of it. You could walk up to this and you would see just this one thing with so much importance given to it, right? Let me quickly show you a visual example so you can get this. Okay, I'll have to look for one, but you guys understand what I'm saying. So let's say, you know how those heist movies, like Mission Impossible and stuff, you have this thing which contains this big crown, and there's so much space around it. There's these red lasers and stuff. That's technically white space. Now let's say you do it at an open air market. You probably have 100 necklaces hanging from one hook, and in one viewport you could probably see hundreds of necklaces. That's no white space. So the reason they've done that is you want to give things the importance they're deserved. So at a showroom, something like that might cost you, let's say, like a lakh, versus the one on the street might be like $300. So using white space, you've given it importance. You're telling people when they look at it, like, this is such an important thing. So keep that in mind. That's a quick example to remember what white space is. It's very relevant in UI design as well. Another thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to clean up this top thing. I would probably remove contact us from here because it's there also. That's a good point in the comments, Diksha. One advantage of keeping it though would be that even when I scroll, the call to action might always be on the top. Let's say if you made it sticky. But even if you do want to include contact us in the top, probably give it a button style. Blogs and FAQs, I would probably make that copy just blog or just FAQ based on what it is, because they're technically two different things. And in terms of text style, whenever you're making a text layer in Figma, this is a very small thing to keep in mind. Never make a text box, which is, let's say I wanted to do this. Instead of doing this and now you start typing, you should just click the text thing and start typing like this. The reason for that I'll show you is because I changed this right here, and now technically the spacing is off because some of it is included in the thing. Let me just show you what that is like. So what I'll do is I'll change it to this, which is grow horizontally rather than fixed size. And now I would fix up the spacing. So back in Photoshop, technically drawing a box and doing it was the better option. I don't remember why exactly, but that is how I used to do things as well. But Sketch, Figma, and the other tool that will not be named on this channel, the best thing to do is to do that with text layers. That's a good point as well by S Sonar in the group, which is technically you're on the home page right now. So it might be a good idea to show an active state, which is you have, let's say, something like this, which is bold. And maybe you have something like this, which just highlights and shows that it's like this is the page that you're on. So that's the feedback for this. I'll give you some rough feedback for the rest of the page. Designing the whole thing would actually take a lot of time. So when you do have columns, when you do set this columns, technically everything should be inside. So stuff like this, no hidden charges, this should all be inside the column. The footer as well, technically it can be outside, but I would say try to keep it inside the column and have the sides as just margin empty space. Giving specific feedback for each section. I would say this, you might consider fixing up the hierarchy. Like both of these are roughly the same size. This should probably be an H2. In terms of copy, the C here should be small and there's no space before the exclamation mark. And of course, this should be the best. So have a look at copy. Copy is actually really important. If you think about it, any web page, like 90% of the page is just text. So pay attention to what that text is. What is the information you're trying to communicate? Typically, it's not a good idea relying on clients for copy because they have no idea how it's actually going to look like. So they'll just come up with random shit. They'll be like, they just write a full essay and they'll give you a Google Doc, 400 words, and they'll be like, put it in the website. That's not the way to do things. The way to do things is in your initial client meetings, figure out what they're trying to communicate. The most important thing, second most important thing, third most important thing. Do that at a page level as well as a section level. And then you figure out rough copy for them, get their feedback and make those changes. For these illustrations here, I would probably put this on the grid. These are not on the grid right now. This here, it's sort of hard to read because there's no hierarchy. Like I don't know what I should read first. Should I read free first consultation? Should I read no hidden charges, flexi appointment bookings? There's not much hierarchy in this page. So I would probably rework this information wise to have a clear hierarchy. And if all of these are important, I don't know if it's that useful. So I would fix up the hierarchy. I would probably try to group these in ways that make sense. Testimonials, this is technically okay, but I might try to fix up the hierarchy a little bit. I might make each of these items cards such that they just feel contained together. And I might also move these much closer to each other. Here, I might apply H2 or an H3 style based on what we've defined. There are some things you can do to improve it. For example, the top, bottom, and technically the left padding, if it was equal, it would probably look a lot more consistent. So you can try that out. And this right here, I would probably try to fix this also in the grid system. Let me just mirror this. That's a very good point about viewport. you have this. So technically, viewport wise, this is fine. There is this concept which is actually it's a misinterpretation, which is everything should be on in the first fold. People don't scroll. That is absolute BS, right? Remember this. That's absolute BS. The fold is a myth. Every single computer has a different fold. There's a website called Where is the Fold? Like, we assume the fold is maybe like 600 pixels, but that's actually not true at all. So different people have different things in viewport. Whether I'm opening it on a 13-inch or a 12-inch MacBook, it's going to be very different versus a 27-inch iMac. So don't worry too much about the fold. There is no way technically. There are some ways, but technically there's no way you can predict exactly where it'll be for 100% of users. A better thing to keep in mind would be, as long as your most important actions are here, it's okay. So here, for example, I have contact us. We have contact us, book appointment, and the video, and they're all in the fold. On a 13-inch MacBook, this might not be visible. In that case, I would suggest when the website is actually being developed, what you can do is you can probably change the margin size and do a few responsiveness things to figure out what it might look like. So folks, that's about it for this live session. Let me know what you thought of this new format. For everybody who wants to also send in their projects, I would be happy to review them on this. I think this would be a good learning for everybody, not just for you, but also for the other people watching. Just so you have some tips in your mind, next time you face a similar problem, that's how you would attack it. I want everybody right now, if you're not already on the Telegram group, to go join that. I also want you to hit like on this video and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. The reason for that is shit like that actually matters when it comes to algorithms. I know a lot of people on YouTube are like, bro, hit the like, hit the subscribe. That's chill. It is actually important. So hit like on this video, hit the subscribe button. I'm going to answer 2 or 3 a little more questions. Where should the mail and contact be? You can just put that in the bottom footer. Clicking contact us can directly scroll you there, or clicking contact us can open a modal. We can take more questions on the Telegram group. So for now, that's about it. Thank you for watching. Hit like, hit subscribe, join the Telegram group if you haven't already. Submit your projects. I don't know how frequently I can do these kind of videos, but I'll try to do them every once in a while. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.